Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Christy, if you don't mind going ahead and starting the presentation. And just as a heads up to everyone, this is being streamed on YouTube and recorded. So it will be up for anybody, if you want to re-review anything or want to let somebody know who couldn't be here, they can find it on the city's YouTube channel. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started, and hopefully anybody who's still going to join won't miss out on too much. My name is Eric Jackson. I manage the new Office of Data and Performance, and I want to welcome all of you and thank you for being interested and for taking time out this evening to learn a little bit about it. There will be plenty of time to ask questions and maybe present some of your own ideas. All right, go ahead and go to the next slide. Next slide. There we go. All right, so the presentation part will be for about 20 minutes, and I want to go fairly quickly through a little bit of how we got to where we are with the founding or the establishment of the office last month. I want to talk a little bit about how we see the work that we're doing and how we're approaching it and how we're organized internally. And then I want to kind of turn outward and talk about how we involve the community. And this is obviously kind of the kickoff to that. Go ahead and I think advance 2 slides. So obviously, I'm pretty excited about this. I'm excited that we're getting some resources. I'm hiring a couple people. We've got some other resources that we can bring to bear. And I think it's going to allow us to take a pretty significant step forward as a city organization in doing a better job of embedding data in our decision-making and bringing disciplined thinking about outcomes, results, and how we measure our progress toward those results in pretty much everything we do over time. At the same time, I really want to underscore that not only is this just the latest incremental step in what's been a pretty long journey over a number of years, but it's also just the next step in what's going to continue to be a long journey. This is going to take time, and I don't want to leave anybody with the impression that we've got everything figured out and now we're just going to roll. We're going to keep learning. We're going to keep kind of adjusting how we do this as we go. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And so I want to make a couple points here. I'm not going to go through all of the history of how we got here. We'll make sure that there's a link up there if you want to read any of these slides in more detail. But I want to point out 2 things. One, of course, is just the fact that this has been 10 years in the making. Probably our early GIS tools, and back in 2012, the first Open Data Day and our first launch of an Open Data Portal was kind of the first external sign, and there was some work going on before then. And over time, I think if you look at this, you'll see there's a little bit of an evolution. We started out thinking primarily about the data itself. How do we get that data? How do we manage it? How do we put it out there for people to access? And then over time, we started thinking more and more about how do we actually use the data? How do we do things like, provide through something like Simplicity, the ability for the community to use it? And how do we use it internally for thinking about what we're doing, deciding what we're doing, and measuring ourselves? It has not been a smooth, linear path, any of it, but this feels like kind of the culmination of a lot of work that's been going on for the last several years. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And next slide. So before I talk about how we're approaching the work, I want to talk a little bit about what the work actually is. This is kind of our latest, best formulation of the mission. And our goal is to empower both the community and city staff, obviously for accountability, but also to make sure that we are naming and kind of measuring ourselves toward actual outcomes and results. And one of the things that I increasingly have become convinced is that the use of data and disciplined kind of performance management is really critical for our communication. Getting us on the same page about what is and what the goals are and how we're going to tell whether we're making progress to those goals is really central to being able to communicate effectively. The other point I would make is that what we don't want to do is create a kind of a place where you can go with a problem, city staff can show up with a problem, we'll go off and crunch some numbers and come back with an answer. That's not, this isn't a data service, it's not an analytics service. Our role in the city is really to help everybody on staff change how they do what they do. And maybe one of the examples that is kind of more recent is thinking about the engagement we had starting this past summer around reimagining public safety. I think is a good example of coming at things a little bit differently. So the old way might have been to really focus on certain kinds of metrics that are centered on law enforcement. What is the crime incidents? What are the 911 calls? What are the traffic stops? Those data are really important. And it's not that we don't want to use those, but when you kind of define public safety solely in terms of metrics that are related to enforcement, a couple of things become true. One, you put the burden, all of the burden on the police to solve the problems. And in many cases, the police are not the right tool to address those problems. And that's part of the conversation we had in the summer and will be continuing. And it also kind of blinds you to some of the alternative strategies that might be there. And so a better way is to engage with everyone and kind of come to agreement on what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. And we started that this past summer by talking about what does it mean to have public safety? What does it mean to be safe in our community? That's just the start of the conversation because we need to go on and talk about how we measure whether we're achieving that and how we measure progress, and then work together on defining strategies. And as we implement those strategies, we can use our progress measures to say, okay, is this working or not? It can be challenging to start out by talking about what the right strategy is. There may be a lot of disagreement about that, but it tends not to be nearly as hard to come to agreement about outcomes, how we're going to measure those outcomes, how we're going to measure progress. And then we have a basis for saying this strategy is or is not working. How do we want to change up? Next slide. So this is an extremely busy slide. You can study it at leisure later. I want to make a couple of points. And the first is, again, is not some service that we're going to create inside of IT. We want to be thinking about this and acting, sorry, just letting somebody in. We want to be thinking about this as truly a city function, a cross-departmental function. And part of making that real is to organize ourselves internally around that. So what we've done is we've created an operating team, which combines staff from our budget office, communications and public engagement department, equity, police, and of course me and a couple of staff that I'll be working with. And the idea is not to kind of take all these people and go create a new department. We all continue to report to the managers in our respective departments, but we're trying to operate collectively as a real cross-functional team. And we want to think about governance and kind of oversight and guidance the same way. Obviously, we each report to our respective managers, but we have a governance team that brings together leadership from across departments and the city manager's office, legal office, and so on, to really be thinking about this as a city rather than from just an IT perspective or just a communications perspective or just a single departmental perspective. The other thing that I want to emphasize, I've been in city government for about 5 years now, and one of the things I've learned is that if you don't put a process behind something, it either isn't going to happen or it certainly isn't going to be able to be sustained. And so we want to think about this as a process that we do rather than some service that we consume. And that the easiest way to do that is not to invent some brand new process, but to tie what we're doing into existing core city processes. And of course, the premier city government process is the budget, annual budget cycle, which is really an all year round cycle for the most part. And so a big part of our work this year is figuring out how to intertwine data and performance with budget, with community engagement, with equity as a single integrated process. And then the other thing we're doing internally is doing training. We have a number of classes that are being offered to all city staff that kicked off last year with a little bit of delay due to the pandemic, but we're now going strong. And also in order to kind of embed those practices, helping people by facilitating, for example, the process of naming outcomes, defining performance measures that will measure progress toward those outcomes, and then going through an iterative process of learning and adjusting strategies based on results. So we want to facilitate that directly as Office of Data and Performance staff. But the other point is that to the extent that this depends on just this office, it's going to fail. It needs to be embedded throughout the city. And so a big part of what we're doing is trying to build a community of practice within the city organization where people can collaborate with each other and support each other in kind of embedding new ways of approaching the work and thinking. So we have, for example, a monthly meeting of a collaboration group where somebody from one department brings a challenge involving data or performance, and we collectively brainstorm and help them kind of find ways to address the challenge. Go ahead to the next slide. And the point of all of this is, we want to be able, as city staff, we want to understand what is the impact of the services we're doing, what's the impact of the projects we're doing, are we achieving the outcomes we wanted, and where we're not, how do we have a disciplined kind of well-defined process for adjusting what we're doing and improving going forward. And if we're trying to improve, one of the ways to go wrong very immediately is to fail to think about establishing a baseline. That's data. And the discipline of working from that baseline and saying, is it getting better? Is it not getting better? How do we adjust? And then if it's kind of an ongoing service, having a good benchmark that we can use to tell whether we're staying at the level that we want to be. And then over time, we really want to be able to start using data more effectively to identify things before they're a crisis and respond to them proactively. Next slide. And of course, the point of all of this is to increase the effectiveness of the services we're delivering for the community and to be able to kind of better communicate with and collaborate with our community. And so the outcomes that we want to focus on as a result of these changes externally is to make sure that all of us can be on the same page about what's happening. What are the trends that are going on? What issues are we working on? Have we identified some issues? Are they being addressed? How are they being addressed? And often, if it's a pothole, then it's just a question of whether we've filled in the pothole. If it's something like gun violence or homelessness, that's something that goes on over a much longer period of time. It involves other agencies. And so really being able to understand what is the city doing, how is it approaching this, how is it doing against the goals that we've identified collectively that it needs to meet. Go ahead to the next slide. And that kind of takes me to the last section. The way we're going to effectively do any of this stuff is if we have good communication in both directions with our community. So, in terms of communication outward, we obviously want to continue evolving some of the tools that we've already got. We've got a data portal. We can continue to use that. We've got some good geographic information systems and maps and such that we can use and share. We've got tools like Simplicity. More recently, we've been exploring ways of putting information out in a dashboard. So I think early September, the Equity and Inclusion Department launched the Equity Dashboard to both kind of give background and story behind what's going on. And that's really critical because it's never just the data, right? But also then to allow you to delve down and start to see some of the numbers. Similarly, a couple of weeks ago, the police department released a police transparency dashboard. And the way I'm thinking about these is experiments. Hopefully we get to a point where we have a nice standard way of sharing across all of our initiatives, all of our performance. But we're really in exploration mode right now where we want to see, try different things, try different ways of doing dashboards and reporting and communication, which may not even be digital, but still using data to communicate with the community about what's going on, and then kind of build from there and find some good ways to work going forward. It's even more important that, if we're trying to make progress toward community goals, the community needs to be involved. The people who are most impacted need to be involved in defining what those goals are, what those outcomes look like, how we're going to measure them. And so a big part of this will be embedding into all of our kind of processes, working with community to identify outcomes and ways of measuring those outcomes. And so, as I said a couple slides ago, the Reimagining Public Safety Initiative, which we've just begun, needs to kind of move into, okay, how in this neighborhood does it look for people to feel safe? How are we going to measure that? What are we going to do? And how are we going to measure the performance of what we're doing? And we're using a framework called results-based accountability. You'll often hear it referred to as RBA. It's the foundation of the racial equity toolkit that we also use. And what it does is give you a kind of a disciplined way of stepping through, defining outcomes, defining ways of measuring progress toward those outcomes, and then iterating to take our baseline performance and do what's called turn the curve and improve or make progress toward our goal. And then finally, we really want to start building more direct relationship. In order to understand how to do all of this well, we're going to need to interact with all of you and other groups in the community. And so we're looking at ways, and I'll talk about it in a moment, but we're looking for ways to build more direct connections. In some cases, that may be geographic. It may be participating in neighborhood meetings. It may be engaging with groups that are more issue focused and finding ways to kind of make sure that we're in communication in both directions about the best ways to communicate and best ways to use data to advance toward our goals together. Next slide. So that was a lot. And again, I want to emphasize that this is very much a work in progress. It's been going on for a while. It's going to be going on for a long time. And one of the real dangers is that we try and take on everything all at once. So one of our goals is to make sure we're really staying focused on some achievable goals in the near term and building from there. So for this first year, we're very much focused on kind of building out the capacity internally. I'm in the process of hiring a couple of people for the office. Hope that will be done sometime next month. And we're continuing to build out our training program and kind of internal collaboration, community building. Externally, our real focus is first on the budget process as a a way of starting to embed these ways of thinking into what we do, but also more generally, again, not trying to take on every single city initiative all at once, but using the Advancing Racial Equity in Asheville initiative to focus our efforts and say, okay, this is where our current priority is. So let's put our energy toward defining outcomes, defining measures, et cetera, particularly in order to support that initiative and in its various guises. And then finally, as I said, we want to start building a direct relationship in the community. Some of that is going to be with data geeks, and I know some of those folks are on this call. And others are going to be really just interested in how we use data to solve their problems or their issues. And so I see this call as kind of the start of a conversation that we want to continue. And one of our goals is to identify some of the best ways that we can keep folks informed on what we're doing, but also receive feedback and get ideas from you all. I'm going to assume if you signed up for this information session that you're interested. And so I'm going to put all your emails onto an announcements, an off performance email list. If you don't want to be on the list, go down to the bottom of the email that confirms you're on and you can get right back off. But with that, let me just turn and answer questions. And there are a lot of people on the call, so you might want to just try typing into the chat the questions and I'll read them and answer. You can also try raising your hand, and I think I can probably see everybody and tell when you have a hand raised. I'm going to get it wrong. Anjali or Anjali? Anjali Patel.
Anjali, you got it right.
Okay.
How many people, when all is said and done, how many people is this office going to employ, and about how much does creating this whole office cost?
So actually employed by the office, such as it is, it's going to be me and 2 other staff members who are kind of dedicated fully to this function. And that funding came, there was kind of as a result of the discussions that were going on over the summer, a couple $100,000 were reallocated from some unused positions in the police department in order to fund this office. So that roughly $200,000, I don't know exactly how that's going to come out, depends on actual salaries and so on. But in terms of how many people are involved, it's going to be much larger than that, because again, we're really looking for ways for some of the functions that have tended to operate in a little bit more siloed fashion, whether that be, communications and public engagement, IT on the data side, equity, budget. We all kind of try and contribute from our different silos to a common goal, and we're really trying to look for ways to operate together. And so on that operating team, we have, I can't count very well, but besides, my staff, I think 4 other people who are involved. It's not their full-time job. They have full-time jobs, but they're tasked with kind of working in coordination with the other functions around this effort. All right, I have.
This is Jonathan Feldman. I just wanted to add that if you'd like the exact budget numbers, I know you're with WLOS. Eric can get those to you if you can shoot him an email, please.
Okay,
absolutely.
Good. Yeah.
So I have a question in the chat from Mike Riley. How can other City of Asheville departments besides police and equity and inclusion contribute to or benefit from the Office of Data and Performance. So I think one of the things that actually is most exciting to me, and before we had the office, we still had me, working on this effort, is that when we had our first class last February using results-based accountability for performance, it filled up instantly. I'm having the same problem now with some of the, where anybody can share ideas, questions. We have an internal email list for that as well. And we have a monthly collaboration group that get together, as I said, and somebody brings a challenge and then we kind of collectively attack it. So, and then the other way is when, if somebody has a particular initiative and we really want to be thinking about how to define outcomes, define measures, and so on, then kind of in traditional IT department fashion, we'll engage with that department as a project and kind of work with them through it. And that I see, equity and inclusion and community and public engagement as kind of our partners in supporting that. And then, for the most part, the other departments are what we're supporting in going through that process. IT, including this office, is facilitating that conversation between city management and the department and the community. So I think we are more broadly thinking a lot about governance, including dealing with privacy and security, thinking about how to safely release data and so on. But I think our focus, at least for now, is much more, is less on trying to take over a process that exists and more on trying to augment what we're doing by bringing kind of disciplined thinking around performance to the equation. Jonathan, did you want? It looks, you're still muted, Dee.
'18 was the most up-to-date, 2019 was the most up-to-date data. It looks like the data has decreased at a rate increase. It is, the participation rates are down now to 0.3%, especially as far as African-American owned businesses. And it was up to 0.7%, which is not a whole lot, but it's steadily going down. I guess a couple of questions. In our meeting, one of the things that we proposed was that the things that are being done now are not working, and we've not found an appropriate way to use, to suggest best practices on how tangible performance metrics that do work can be infused into. And that's just, the other thing is that when you're dealing with marginalized people, because some of us are not able to amplify that, we get neglected. And this program has been around 30 years now. So there's a lot of money that's been put into this program. I don't know how many millions of dollars, but quite a few. And there are contractors involved in it. The second part of my question is, will the city evaluate? Who's going to evaluate the performance metrics, the outcomes? Is it going to still be city staff? Because what we found is when you have the same people doing the same things, then things keep staying the same. Nothing ever changes. So we've got a lot of pretty technical questions. I think we even commented on the CAPER report that's been sent to HUD about the lack of performance metrics, rubrics, as far as our participation on city contracts and business development. Even though there are some contractors, this is not casting askance at the city department because some contractors are also involved. So our questions are around inputs, program participation, the who, what, where, the outputs, and then the outcomes. Very important in the evaluation. And I'm so sorry for being long-winded, but we do have a paper on it. We have the data. And there's a whole couple of committees assigned to this. So we're looking for pretty much answers.
Hey, Eric, let me just, we would love to hear more about that. And I know that you have Eric's email.
Yes.
I did want to say, in terms of who is going to evaluate, we're still going to stick with the city manager form of government and the city council. And so I think that's really going to be where that, I'm so sorry for my dog whining. So I think that's going to be where we take our direction from. But I think what Eric and I both are hoping is that this program will be able to offer a richer, more meaningful set of data and context to those decision makers so they can make more informed decisions. If that makes sense. Eric, I don't know if you have anything that...
I think what I'd also add is the other thing that we want to bring is kind of a more discipline around the process for deciding what we're going to measure, how we're going to measure it, what the data is, and to do that in a completely transparent way. I think, there have been lots of efforts to get at data, lots of efforts to kind of measure things. And, some of them have worked out well, some of them not so much. I think bringing kind of a standard methodology that engages the people who are being impacted in the process at every stage, I think that's critical. And simply having a discipline that says we have a kind of best practice way of approaching how we ask the question, how we answer the question, and how we share the data will help. To your specific question about, for example, business inclusion, as I know you're aware, we have a new policy that just kind of went into effect. And one of the things we're doing is building out a much richer set of data, not just about the end result, but also about the process and sharing all of that publicly. And I think that's also going to be an ongoing conversation. But that's been a lot of our effort over the past few months in figuring out how to take that new policy and really implement the data side behind it, as well as the procedures, so that we can share that. And that, again, to any of you on all of this, I am more than happy. I think my email is on the announcement and in the slides. I would love to have one-on-one conversations, happy to answer questions by email and so on as well. And I saw, was it Amber Victoria that had a hand up?
We did. We also have a question from Patrick Conant. So why don't we go to Amber if she can unmute, and if not. So this may be it. Amber Victoria Williams, are you still hiring? Can you speak to BIPOC representation on your staff? So yes, we are still hiring. We're, if you go to the city's job website, you'll see that both positions, there's a performance analyst position, which is a bit more technical, and a data communication specialist, which is a little bit less technical. Both of those jobs are still open. We are getting toward kind of panel interviews with a number of them, but I'm committed to, let me back up a little bit. One of the commitments that we are making is really thinking about our processes in order to make sure that we're not just doing the same thing the same way in order to get the same result. I don't have to describe yet. Overall, you can look at representation on city staff. Generally, it's on our open data portal. It's also available, I think, through the equity dashboard. And we've got some improving to do. I mean, that's the direct answer there. What I've been doing is
a lot of outreach. And part of what I've tried to do in this process is, rather than kind of rush and get people hired the fastest way possible, which there's a strong temptation to do. It's a lot of work to do it differently. I've been continued to do outreach, continued to invite more applications, and we will hold this open up to the last minute. And I'm pleased with some of the differences in the results that we're getting in people who are applying. How that's going to come out, I don't know, but we are committed to continuing to look at the how we do what we do and revising that so that we're getting better results than we have gotten in the past. Other questions? Who am I? I'm not a particularly visual person, so if I'm missing you, just unmute and give me a shout. Dee, I think we're getting some background from you.
Okay, I'm sorry, I should mute myself.
That's fine. I have to say, part of what, there's been a lot of negative as a result of the pandemic. I think one of the positives is that we human beings with life going on behind us. So it never bothers me that we have dogs and children. Any other questions? Okay. Patrick Conant is asking, how does this department interact with city council or boards and commissions? I understand the intent is not to create a data service, but I'm wondering if there's a particular board or committee that will hear reports from this office and provide direction or oversight. And I will simply say the correct answer to that right now is I don't know. We've got an oversight group within the city that does not have any external representation. That is kind of an evolution of what we were using last year. That's a good question and is one of the things that we'll continue discussing, but also we'll share out as it evolves. I do want to emphasize that we were announced on, I think, December 8th. So, and one or two things have been going on since then. So we're very much kind of in process. And I don't know the answers to all the questions. That's a good one. And it's one that I will definitely get back to you all on. Well, I have committed to being here until 7, or at least until everybody leaves me. But I don't want to hold people any longer than we're able to actually use productively. So any last questions before we kind of declare it done and let people go on to dinner and such? Dee Williams is asking, will you have rubrics and performance criteria for city departments and RFPs rather than using familiar contacts? Is it possible we can get someone from this office or the city to provide more information? So I know, and this ties partly into the new business inclusion policy and the procedures that are being worked around that. There are both performance criteria, but also new standards that are being rolled out. And I'm not the primary person to talk about this. That would be Rosanna Mulcahy. But I do know that not only are we kind of setting standards for outreach and requiring, particularly among city staff, outreach that is much more inclusive than it's been, we'll also be making all of that information available publicly. We have a request for the link to the business inclusion policy. If somebody can get to it faster.
We can just include that in the follow-up email, Eric.
Good idea. Thank you.
Sure.
I tend to become increasingly stupid after about 6 p.m. So thank you for augmenting my intelligence. All right. There you go. Thank you, Liz. It's in the chat, and we will also include this in the email, along with a link to this presentation and my email. And with that, I think we'll declare this done. Please feel free to reach out to me with any other questions, discussions. I always enjoy meeting. And I'd love to hear your ideas about ways that we can build a better connection with more of the community around how to use data in what we're doing. All right. I hope you all have a great evening.